And that's President Donald Trump speaking at Emancipation Hall, just down from the rotunda in which he was sworn in, took his oath of office and gave his inaugural speech as he returned to the U.S. White House as the 47th President of the United States. You're watching the special coverage of the U.S. inauguration of President Donald Trump right here on News Central. Let's continue the discussions as we're bringing in more guests who are joining us right now.
We have public policy analyst Magnus Onyibe. He joins us from Lagos, Nigeria. We also have Dr. Lassane Ouedraogo, is from the Center for Democracy and Development. He joins us from Abidjan in the Ivory Coast. A warm welcome to you, gentlemen, and thanks for joining us on this special broadcast. I would like to start with Dr. Ouedraogo. What does the return of Trump mean for Africa? What are the impact that this second Trump presidency would mean for Africa in terms of policies?
I would say U.S.-Africa relations have always evolved from Cold War competitions to partnerships over the past decades, which was focused on trade, security, health, and counterterrorism. Leaders have always shaped policies based on global challenges and strategic priorities, reflecting both opportunities but also tensions in those relationships. And during President Trump's tenure, we have seen him a little bit sort of like a continuation of that, but a little bit of disengagement with Africa, in the sense that he maintained the U.S. engagement, sending Africa envoy for the Sahel for the first time, getting interested in the Sahel for the first time with the U.S. Africa special envoy. I see that sort of like continuation of U.S. engagement based on what is going on. I believe that he was more keen to countering Chinese presence in Africa broadly. But when Trump left office, his successor did not continue with the same dynamic. We've seen a little bit of disengagement. We've seen a little bit of a retreat of the Biden administration. Now that Trump is back in office, I think he might be trying to come back in to re-engage with the same sort of energy. I'm sure that I think that the U.S. special envoy to Africa will be sending new special envoys to Africa with the same consideration that the Africa that he has left a few years ago has now changed. It is not the same Africa that he left a few years ago. The international relations have evolved so much that a Trump administration will seek not only to engage with key issues like security, but also placing U.S. back into Africa. He talked about an America that is engaging with the world, but an America that is putting American priorities first. But we cannot talk about American priorities with an America that is retreating from Africa, because retreating from Africa means leaving that space for other powers such as Russia, such as China. And I think Trump is going to redesign a new engagement with Africa. But the thing is with Mr. Trump is that there's a lot of unknowns. There's a lot of there's a lot of uncertainty with the ways in which he's going to engage with Africa. That is where there's a little bit of skepticism in terms of how is that new administration going to engage with the continent.
And so in the engagement with the continent, let me bring Mr. Onyibe into the conversation. We've seen a lot of what he said and what he didn't say. Didn't mention Africa by name, barely really focused on anything outside of his American conversation, but saying he wants to be a peace maker and a unifier. A lot of things that he said. Mr. Onyibe, take me through what you thought were the high points of the speech. Not necessarily the things you might have agreed with, but the things that really did stick out to you when Donald Trump was making his inaugural speech as he goes back into as he starts his second tenure as American president.
Okay. I would just go back to Dr. Lassane Ouedraogo talking about America and Africa. Now, there's a Russian military presence in Africa. We've seen growing anti-French sentiments in the Sahel, and also American troops leaving Niger. Russia's growing foothold in Africa through military partnerships poses strategic challenges to the United States of America. Do you think with Trump's America First policy, does he even care if there's a U.S. Africa Command? And also, the war in Sudan, Trump during his speech today did talk about being a peacemaker. The war in Sudan has been going on for quite a long time, for more than 2 years now. The belligerents don't show any sign of abating. So can America use its influence to bring an end to that? And do we see a continuation? Do we see America challenging the Russians in West Africa and the Sahel?
If there is one thing Mr. Trump is known for is his ability to making deals. And if he so desires to bring back peace in some of our regions, including West Africa, the Sahel, Central Africa, Sudan, and so on, I think he has the tremendous ability to do so, because in terms of negotiations, in terms of bilateral or multilateral negotiations, a Trump administration could mean seriously putting the pedal on the foot on the pedal in terms of Americans' support for some of the belligerents in those conflicts. So, and those conflicts do not limit to the countries that we have just mentioned and the region that we have mentioned. They are international, people who are somehow indirectly involved in the conflict. And to resolve those conflicts, we will need American leadership that are interested in actually putting an end to that conflict. An American leadership that is willing to engage with the other bilateral partners that are involved, so as to actually come to a table, to bring the belligerent to a table of negotiation, not only in Sudan and the Sahel, but in the Congos and many places of Africa where we've seen the U.S. sort of like walk back. You've just mentioned the case of Niger, and it's not, we're not going to see America flexing its muscles and coming back into Africa. But I'm hoping that we're going to see an America that is listening more to what is going on, an America that is taking the temperature, an America that is working under, behind the scenes with all the participants and, the stakeholders in those conflicts, and seeking a way to resolve the conflicts. Because in America, that making America great is obviously making America great at home, but the way America projects itself outside of America is also part of that deal of making America great. If we to take Mr. Trump on his words, he's not going to crawl back. He's going to engage with the rest of the world, and in Africa in particular.
All right, thank you so much. Let's see if we can bring Mr. Magnus Onyibe into the conversation now. Mr. Onyibe, are you with us? Hello, Mr. Magnus Onyibe.
Yes,
fantastic.
I am. I'm not hearing you very clearly, but I can hear you sort of.
All right, thank you so much for joining us. Magnus Onyibe is a public policy analyst, and he's part of our conversation today. Mr. Onyibe, I'd just like to get off the top of my head with you as you join us now, your thoughts on what President Trump said and what possibly you think he didn't say that matters just as much. What are your thoughts on President Trump's inaugural speech as he comes back for his second tenure?
His speech, first of all, thank you for having me. President Trump's speech is expected. Some people are describing it as a war speech. Even if he's proposing peace and unity, he has identified the people or the countries that are in opposition to the United States of America, and he has mapped out what he needs to do to put them in check and to make America great again. That's a takeaway that I got from the speech. Lots of people were thinking that he was blustering when he made the promises about renaming the Gulf of Mexico and the tariff threats that he made during his campaign. But as you can see from his inaugural speech, he has already started setting out the stage to be able to achieve those objectives. Also, lots of people were wrong when they assumed that he was going to begin to deport illegal immigrants or undocumented people in the United States of America immediately. Obviously, from his speech, he's not going to do that. He's targeting the criminal elements amongst them. He's not going to stop the legitimate ones that are there already, but he's going to identify the criminal ones and he's going to send them back to their countries of origin, as he stated. So President Trump has proven to be a man of his words, and I think he's going to see all the promises that he made true.
All right, thank you so much, Mr. Onyibe. Afia Hagen is back with us, News Central's international correspondent. As I said earlier, she had covered the elections in November 2024, and she has been on the streets of London today. Afia, I'm looking at all of the things that Donald Trump ended up saying, and as I asked Mr. Onyibe, I'm asking you as well, the key points for you that stood out. They say, as body language experts and verbal experts as we are, that there's a lot of what is that you need to look at in what is said and what is left unsaid. So what do you think are the highlights of President Trump's speech, and what do you think was notably missing, if anything?
I think it was much more of a tempered speech than perhaps we were expecting. And actually, in the past sort of half an hour, he's done another speech in the Capitol building for lawmakers and supporters, which was much more typical Trump, much more wide-ranging, and actually a lot more falsehoods and things that have been proven wrong in there, talking about stolen elections and record inflation and things like that. But if we go back to the speech that he did, his official speech, so to speak, I mean, I think it was really notable, in fact, that he didn't mention tariffs. Now, that's something that he said was going to be coming in on day one of his presidency, these tariffs which would apply to China, to Mexico, to Canada. You know, those things were not mentioned. And I wonder why. Perhaps he's just going to go straight to executive orders. And we know now that those are being signed, you know, and will be signed over the coming hours. You know, I think the bits that were notable for me, definitely talking about his political comeback, saying the American people have spoken. I stand before you as proof you should never believe something is impossible to do. In America, doing the impossible is what we do best. This is really tying in with his kind of golden era of America that he's saying. America is back, making America great again. He talked about the Israel-Hamas ceasefire deal, which I really expected. He's going to take as much credit for that as possible. The Panama Canal, a foolish gift that should never have been made, you know, which he falsely claimed that China is operating. You know, there were so many sort of really notable statements there. But I think it was all about reinforcing this golden era, reinforcing the things that he really believes in, you know, getting rid of DE&I. You know, he's going to put an end to the government policy of bringing race and gender into every aspect of public life. And then talking about that American dream will soon be back, you know, that great some say a myth of the American dream, saying that it will be back. Drill, baby, drill. I think that was very noticeable as well, that he's going to sort of throw away all the green initiatives that have been in place and making America a manufacturing nation once again. National emergency on the border. Immigration is going to be so high up his agenda. By signing that executive order declaring that national emergency on the US-Mexico border, then he can pretty much, he's got carte blanche to do what he wants. And actually that is beginning already. There's an app that Mexican people who wanted to come to America can use to book appointments at the border for their cases to be heard. That app has now stopped working. People who had appointments that have been booked have been cancelled. It could be into the hundreds of thousands. So we're seeing these things playing out already. And this is all about the president portraying the power and the strength that he has. And also, if we look at, who was behind him while he is making those statements, billionaires, the 4 richest people in the world flanking him as he is making the statements. It's all about strength and power.
And it's interesting that you note the people who were flanking Donald Trump behind when he made those statements. We saw, of course, his head of the DOG, Department of Governmental Efficiency. As we said earlier, there's already a lawsuit against that as he was being sworn in. Then we also saw the founder of Facebook and CEO of Meta, that's Mark Zuckerberg, with his wife. We saw I guess podcast host, that's what I call him, Joe Rogan, who was very, very much one of those who was a supporter of Trump. There were a lot of notable CEOs in the place. Jeff Bezos was there also with his fiance. So it sort of gives you an idea, Sam Altman as well of OpenAI, it sort of gives you an idea of the kind of business or the kind of government we might expect from the Trump administration. Because, famously in his first tenure, he was saying he was going to drain the swamp. But it seems that the swamp is really filling up right behind him. Mr. Onyibe, I'm going to come to you with this. Looking at all the very wealthy, influential people who seemingly are now towing the Trump line. We know what happened with Meta in terms of the fact-checking program, and we've seen that many people are towing that line because they know what comes with the Trump presidency. I know it's going to be quite an interesting time. Afia, let me stay with you on that, because he also spoke about the fact that he was going to do an executive order to stop government censorship and bring back free speech. We spoke to the chief editor of Africa Check last week on what Mark Zuckerberg did and how he was conflating freedom of speech with third-party fact-checking. As a journalist who works internationally and who also looks at all the things that come about, are you concerned about what Donald Trump has said and the potential real-world ramifications? We've seen some of that already on X, which is owned by Elon Musk.
And I know a lot of my colleagues are, because let's get it straight, there's a real difference between free speech and saying whatever we want, wherever we want, but also we have to know that what we're saying is true, and it's not about versions of the truth, it's about the actual truth. And that's why fact checkers on social media, where it's such an open forum, were so important, so that you cannot say what you want and conflate these things as true. Of course, we know that there definitely should be free speech, and social media should be a place for people on the left, people on the right, people in the center to express their views. But if you are sort of verging into the area of everything I'm saying is fact and not opinion, then if you are stating that, then your facts have to be true. And that's why the fact checkers were there. And it was really felt that over the years, a lot of people who were on the right wing, Trump supporters, members of the Republican Party, were consistently fact-checked for things that they said because they weren't true. And Trump and his supporters didn't like that. And that's why Mark Zuckerberg has, essentially taken the knee and decided that, actually, if I am going to be able to survive the next 4 years of this Trump presidency, I need to get on the right side. And I mean the right side in every single sense of that word. And so he gets gets rid of the fact checkers. And so therefore you might have statements out there, not might, you will have statements out there on social media that people are purporting as facts, but are not true. A prime example of that is the story about people eating dogs, about immigrants eating cats and dogs, which we know was factually incorrect. But it spread like wildfire on social media. Now, without fact-checking, without community noise, people will just think that people are spreading that, and that is true, when it wasn't. You're going to have so much of that now. And if you have no kind of ways to stop that, then you have lies purported as fact on social media, and that's very, very concerning.
Okay, Afia, just hold on. We can see Donald Trump seemingly signing some executive orders. Now, let's quickly take a look at what's happening and get some visuals right now from Washington, D.C.
Right. Thank you very much.
Great. Very
Nice
good.
to meet you. Thank you very much. There we go. Like that. All right. See you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Did you have a good meeting with former President Biden?
Very nice. Very nice. Beautiful custom.
Mr. President,
He goes back as long as hell comes. Before that, it was a stagecoach. But I thought it was beautiful. Thank you. Great job. Great job. Thank you. Check.
Mr. President, do you have any reaction to the pardons President Biden did at the last minute?
Well, I'm not going to discuss it now. I think it was unfortunate that he did that. We won't discuss it now. There's plenty of time to discuss it.
Thank you very much, guys.
Should we go to lunch?
Thank you very much.
Okay.
All right, it's looking like President Donald Trump signing some executive orders there. As being reported, he's expected to sign about 10 executive orders. He's also going to designate cartels, including M613, one of the deadliest cartels in South America, and the Venezuelan gang Tarn de Arga as foreign terrorist organizations. They also plan to end asylum, which is a form of international protection granted to individuals fleeing persecution in their home country. So those might be the orders that we've seen Donald Trump signing into law as of now. Wenga.
Yes, we have Mr. Magnus Onyibe back with us. But before we go to Mr. Onyibe, let me just talk to Dr. Ouedraogo about Africa's role in global governance vis-a-vis the Trump presidency. Africa's 54 votes in the United Nations General Assembly are critical. How might Trump leverage or alienate this bloc in his broader foreign policy? And also, there's been calls for an African a permanent seat in the UN Security Council. For Africa to have a permanent seat in the United Nations Security Council. There's been calls for reforms of IMF and the United Nations. How do you think Trump's policies might impact Africa's push for a greater representation?
I think President Trump has demonstrated that he's not your conventional leader and he's not approaching international relations in a very conventional manner. That being said, Trump administration does actually open opportunities for Africans and to sort of like break away from traditional international conventions whereby, you know, the African vote is almost a vote that is predefined. You know, you can clearly on any issue determine what Africans will vote for, what Africans will align either with the EU, either with France, or either with the USA, right? So under a Trump administration, all of that is kind of like shaken. But like I said before, Mr. Trump, if there's one thing he's really, really good at doing, is negotiation. If Mr. Trump wants you to vote in a certain way, he will definitely know how to negotiate, what kind of deal to put on the table. You don't get to win all the time. He does not get to win all the time. He wins here and he knows what to lose in order to win over there. That's why he's more or less successful in seeking to resolve some of the international conflicts. But that being said, when it comes to the negotiation for an African seat at the UN core sort of decision making, I think there's an opportunity for Africans to actually do that kind of negotiation under Trump. I'm making this argument based on the fact that since Trump does not do things in a very conventional manner, there's always room to move things around. But that will also mean that Africans will have to not just wait for U.S. policies to come and define Africa-U.S. relationship, but we should be building up our own Africa-U.S. relationship, whether through our regional blocs, through the African Union. And I think that is the tendency right now, and especially through the African Union. And since Mr. Trump is sort of like very unconventional, it actually opens the room for realignments. It opens the room for Africans to actually align with other international partners, because Africa is almost like an afterthought. He is not putting Africa at the center. He will reach out to African countries when he needs them, and by the time he needs them, maybe by that they have already aligned with other forces. We've seen President Biden go to Africa almost at the eve of his almost the last day of his presidency, his tenure. Who does this? What kind of deal can you actually pull out? Of course, in Angola, in all the places, the U.S. has interest. The U.S. has economic interest that might interest that Angola nation. But beyond Angola, what about the rest of Africa? What about the African trade that was instituted under the Obama and repealed later on, the Agora and all of these existing major multilateral conventions that exist between the USA and Africa. When Trump begins to issue his executive order, is it going to impact some of those existing ties? What about the Africa Corps, the US military conventions with Africans that allow Africans to send military to the US for training, and so on and so forth? I think there is cause for concern, but at the same time, Africans should seize this as an opportunity when in the U.S. things are not done in the conventional way. It actually opens doors for negotiation. We shouldn't see this as a grim and dark period, but we also see this as a moment when things are being shaken. So in international relations, when things are still, when things are not moving, when things are stable, it does not allow room for improvement when you're on the weaker side.
Okay.
And Africa seems to be on the weaker side of this relationship. And when things are not stable in the U.S. International relations, it allows us to grow. It allows us to seize the opportunity to actually place our position within that international body, which is the United Nations.
Thank you so much for that. Afia, I'll come back to you. We just have a few minutes left. Do we still have Afia Hagen with us? We have just a few minutes left in all this conversation. We've seen the luncheon that's happening now for President Trump. There's still a number of activities that are expected to happen over the next few hours in the United States. But overall, Donald Trump is back. He's back victorious. He's back with a mandate. He's back with the Congress. It's the Republicans that control the Senate. It's the Republicans that control the House of Representatives. Donald Trump also has a number of people that he puts on the Supreme Court bench, and there's expectations that a number of issues will make it to the United States Supreme Court. And because not necessarily a majority, but he has enough people on the bench, we are going to see a total domination of Donald Trump in governance and his impact. He's going to leave a noticeable impact on American law and legislation
has it better
into the
than
future.
His first term.
Absolutely better. Afia, when you look at that whole picture, I won't say if it does it scare you, but what do you think? Is there any way in which we can predict in any way what we can expect in the next 4 years?
And that is Donald Trump all over, completely unpredictable, Tolu. And, you know, I think what we can expect in one sense, what I can tell you is that because of that almost complete control of both Congress and both the Senate, is that what President Trump wants, more likely or most likely he will get by a way of executive order or getting those bills through Congress and Senate. And it's all going to be based around making America great again, or how he sees that in his eyes. We got the foreshadowing of that in his speech, and actually in his election campaign as well. It's going to focus around immigration, tightening borders. It's going to focus on things like AI and tech, and how he can use tech to push America forward to this golden age. We talked about the 4 billionaires sitting behind him. We've had all this furore over TikTok in the past 24 hours. He wants that to have 50% US ownership. You know, it's all about broadening into those circles. It's about how he's going to behave internationally. We talked about his relationship with Africa and how that doesn't really seem to feature. But he's looking at the Panama Canal. He's looking at the Gulf of Mexico that he wants to call the Gulf of America, making Canada the 51st state, potentially buying Greenland. All of these things that he wants to do, which, you know, sometimes we may look at these things and say that sounds like a madcap idea, but at the end of the day, he has the mandate to be able to get these things through Congress and through Senate. So it's completely unpredictable the things that he will do in his eyes to bring America forth to this new second golden era.
Thank you very much, Fia. As we wrap up, I'd like to bring in Mr. Magnus Onyibe to share your final thoughts on your expectations for the Trump presidency 2.0. Yeah.
Oh, unfortunately, it seems we may have lost our connection with Mr. Magnus Onyibe. We'll look forward to having him in any of our broadcasts at a later date to continue these conversations. But as we talked about the rich, the high, and the mighty that were there, let's also take note that all living presidents also attended Donald Trump's inauguration. The noticeable absence was former First Lady Michelle Obama. Some have said she is protecting her peace. Well, she has 4 years to do that.
Also absent
at Jimmy Carter's funeral as well. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll have to say a very big thank you to you for joining us this evening, for being with us throughout the conversations as Donald J. Trump went back into the White House, taking an oath of office, swearing in, and of course, moving in, I'm very sure, in any moment now, himself and J.D. Vance as his vice president. What do we know about what's going to happen? Immigration will continue to be very high on the president's radar, as well as things concerning making sure he brings about the golden era of the United States.
And of course, we know he's going to pull out of the Paris Agreement, climate change. I would like to say a big thank you to our distinguished panelists and resource persons, of course, our international correspondent in London, Afia Hagen, Dr. Lassane Ouedraogo, and everyone that joined us on today's special broadcast.
All right, so we'll see you guys again soon. We'll leave you with visuals from one of the events. I think this is the presidential luncheon in honor of the new president, returned president of the United States of America. My name is Solulokwe Adeleru Balogun. I'll see you again soon.